Reform are really ramping up support, and I do think that we are sleepwalking into a Reform government, and I'm really concerned that a number of Labour MPs aren't quite grasping that they are going to be their next competition at the next election. So there was this clip of Harriet Harman over the weekend. She was on Trevor Phillips on Sky News, and we'll play it for you now.
Harriet, it's not just the Tories who have to be worried. Mr Farage is after Labour seats as well, and I think the number now was they came second in 89 seats to Labour. How worried should the party be about the threat, or the challenge, I should say, from Farage?
Well, I think people should be very concerned about reform because they're not just a threat to individual parties, but I actually think they're a threat to democracy because they are offering easy answers to real problems, which are not a solution and will just increase people's distrust and disillusionment. But I think the shadow minister who you had on was really in denial about the situation. If you look at the council by-election results, and I'm afraid I look at them every Friday morning very anxiously after the Thursday council by-elections, what they show, I know, is that they show a real fall in Labour's support. If you look at the percentage change, it's not just about who's won, it's who's voting and what the percentage change is. And reform from a standing start is like gaining 40%, whereas the Labour's down, but the Tories are massively down as well. And I think that the main threat to reform currently from reform is to the Tory party. And what I didn't see is any acknowledgement, and we haven't seen this either from Kemi Badenoch, that reform is a problem. They're saying it's not a problem until they say, look, we're really up against it. They won't start dealing with it.
OK, so there she is discussing reform and how they're a threat to democracy. Now, I'm really worried about this for a number of reasons, but mostly because we are always an election cycle behind the US. Can I just sneeze? No. OK. We go again. So I'm concerned about this because we are always one election cycle behind the US. Now, if you look at what happened the last two elections, now I'm going to speak in broad strokes here, and there's going to be some US politics nerd who's going to tell me to stay out of his country, and fine. If you look at what happened with Biden and Trump, Biden won, and you can make quite a strong argument that was simply a protest vote. People did not want Trump to win. What happened in our election just gone? Labour won because they didn't want the Tories to win. Broad strokes, I'm speaking in. Now you look at the American election that just passed in November, and Trump wins on this sort of populist ticket. The Republicans are like the sexy anti-vote, right? They are the sort of people you want to put on your social media because it's controversial, particularly young men who are really, I guess, enfranchised by people like Elon Musk, who are kind of in the hemisphere with Joe Rogan and that sort of ilk. We are moving into that sort of election with reform. And the more that you have Labour MPs or former Labour grandees like Harriet Harman describing them as anti-democratic, the sexier and more appealing they become.
Do you think so? Oh, that's interesting. I actually don't think that would not be my takeaway from that.
What would your takeaway be?
I thought she was actually making quite... So what is surprising there, that Labour Party grandee is anti-reform. I don't think reform can actually do very much with that. What I think it did speak to was actually maybe a potential failing of reform potentially is... So at the moment, there isn't a clear idea of how reform would do in government. There's almost like a last... What there is potential for is reform to be the last roll of the dice in liberal democracy. If in worst case scenario, I don't think this is terribly likely. There's not an anti-democratic bent within reform. I would say they're part of a strong right, like a radical right rather than far right. I think that's how I'd classify the party. They're not anti-democratic institutions. But if a reform government is voted in, and they are unable the same way, I think they'd have the exact same pressures as Starmer's currently facing, in that fix the fucking country. And once they don't do that, there would actually maybe be room for an even further right, anti-democratic movement to gain support. So it's like you if reform gain support in like making light and sowing distrust in institutions, they are breeding a beast, an even further right beast potentially.
Yeah, no, I get that. But then you could make that argument about Labour at the moment, because Keir Starmer has been in government now for a few months.
Yeah.
And the most recent speech we heard from him was that it's actually very difficult to do anything because civil servants won't let you push any legislation through. Mm-hmm. That's almost similar to what the Conservatives were saying.
Yeah.
That's straight out of the Dominic Cummings playbook.
Yeah.
But that is sowing distrust in institutions. In the same way, I totally understand what you mean about when they get in, they will have their feet held to the fire. And they can't just say things like,
we're going to fucking like liberalise everything.
Yes, and we're going to the state's now going to be like the size of a pinhead, and there's going to be no
every
student
school's
loan.
a free school. Like,
however, that doesn't mean they won't get into government. It doesn't mean that they won't be able to build a rather successful electoral strategy. Because look, a lot of their policies are at odds with each other. I actually think the sort of sometimes the kind of further right rhetoric that has been peddled by them is actually not what the party wants to be. When Nigel Farage said something about Muslims a few months ago, and I actually think that was on Trevor Phillips at the time, he's essentially said that they don't, I've got to be very careful with my language here. Mm-hmm. I believe he said something on the lines of they don't assimilate, they don't learn the language. I actually thought that didn't fit what the Reform Party are trying to be. I think they want to project it without saying it.
yeah, I don't know. I think you can't like they can't just dog whistle the whole time. They have to bark. They have to bark sometimes. Otherwise they'll forget.
Have to bark.
They have to bark. And that was a bark.
Yeah.
That was a loud and clear bark.
But Braverman barked more than Farage did. No, but she did.
She did.
During her time.
I'm
said
just laughing
more,
at the dog metaphor. It's just making me laugh.
But she said actually more like objective, like, quotes, things that you could quote
Yeah.
that were, within that realm of rhetoric. Mm-hmm. Farage is sort of like Teflon. He goes near it and he doesn't say it.
Mm-hmm. But his profile is such that you know exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah.
He's done the heavy lifting. Something that I'm kind of interested in is the phenomenon of reform support amongst young men. So in the general election, there's basically equal amount of support amongst young men between Reform and the Green Party. And in all the reporting I've seen done about young men supporting Reform, it has largely been young men who have joined Reform. Mm-hmm. And they're not representative of, like, no one would ever suggest that a young Labour member is representative of the wider youth,
movement,
young people at large, even though that was the party that young people voted for with the largest majority. That's been the case for ages. But there's been very little. What I think is actually would be more interesting to see is interviewing people who are school leavers, people who have who are normal people who aren't involved in politics but are determined to vote. They're like, I'm going to vote for Reform. That would be the canary in the coal mine. If you're vox popping normal people in regional parts of the UK, young people who are all saying, I'm going to vote for Reform, that would be illustrative of this phenomenon that people talk about, rather than just interviewing people who are standing to be councillors in local elections.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I've not seen. I completely understand the argument.
I mean, I have seen it. During the election, I did speak to a number of young men who said they were going to vote for Reform.
But that wasn't borne out in the numbers.
I see what yeah, but they don't vote. Young people don't vote. That's the one. Mm-hmm. I think we need to start from that benchmark. You basically got to say it's like we're pretty much on zero on getting like 18 to 24-year-old young men to vote. And if they do, they're at university and they might go to vote for the Green Party or used to vote for the Labour Party, but not so much anymore.
Like if
you can mobilise them to vote, then a legacy party has a problem.
Like if Reform get cool people, that's the problem. They're not. Richard Tyson's cool. Nigel Farage is cool. Richard Tyson's cool. Lee Anderson's kind of funny, I guess. James Murdoch is hits women, so.
But you know something? It didn't matter. That this is the whole thing. that I found really puzzling and that I worry about with them. It doesn't matter that he has a spent conviction for kicking his girlfriend. It doesn't matter, because the way that it's moving online at the moment, we are moving back into like the sort of trenches of misogyny. We are. It is sexy to hit women again. Like, look at what the absolute I mean, social media, you've got to be careful, it's not indicative of like wider public sentiment. But look at the absolute tomfoolery about that picture of Sydney Sweeney that went viral over the weekend.
Yeah.
She didn't have a lot of makeup on, and men were like, she's mid.
Yeah.
I'd kick her out of bed.
But then I do think those people, like, those are fucking weird freaks. Like, that's not.
And freaks are gaining momentum, Ed.
No, I don't know. I think it's like Twitter now. You always have to take Twitter with a pinch of salt.
Of course.
But online freaks with a fucking like Bronze Age Twitter profile picture saying that Sydney Sweeney's mid. Like, I'm not even funny. Sydney Sweeney is hot is probably called the most commonly held public opinion in the UK. That like 99.99999 times out of 100, someone is saying she's hot. She looks hot there. Like, I think there is a online trend of return to the 50s and like domestic, like the traditional domestic responsibilities for women and stuff like that. That's one of these things as well. In the UK, I'm still yet to see
But we're always one election cycle behind the US.
Yes.
I just think that we're not ready for it. We're not preparing for it properly.
Do you know,
like, I'm looking at Farage like tweeting this morning. Again, look, I'm not saying that everything can be determined from Twitter. I don't think that at all. But I mean, we talked about sowing distrust. So we heard this morning there was a Labour minister doing the rounds, and he was asked by Nick Ferrari, will you be cancelling the local elections next year? And didn't give a definitive answer. Farage is straight on Twitter. Cancelling elections in some areas of the country where reform are gaining momentum is the act of a desperate government. They have the audacity to tell us that a threat to democracy whilst they act like, to call us a threat to democracy whilst they act like a third world dictator. That is sowing distrust.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is making reform. That is the fight that reform will take to the upcoming election. Labour do not want you to have a voice. They are a dictator. They don't care about you, the common man, and we do.
But it comes back again to fucking Labour's terrible communications. Like, why are you not having? I was like, look, Will Lloyd wrote in the Times today. He was basically saying, like, broadcast media numbers are down so much, and like however many people now consume news online. Why is Keir Starmer queuing up to get his arse kicked by Beth Rigby? He was like, he was basically arguing he should do one broadcast interview a year and spend the rest of his time nailing social media. Actually, like, he should come. Like, he should obviously come here. I'm not even just saying that. Like,
I know, but they've got like the. Do you know who said that the other day? Jonathan Gullis on Sky.
Said what?
He said that the government should be doing interviews on Joe. And obviously,
like,
but
it's not just us to be big-headed. They should be engaging with us, with Lad Bible, Novara.
Yes.
Like, if you want, you need to be engaging with good. Do you know that guy who drives me fucking nuts? Dylan Page. He's like the newsreader on TikTok. He's like News Daddy, and he's like, he just reads the news. He's like a news influencer essentially. I don't think he's a trained journalist, but he just like reads out headlines. They should be going on to him. They should be doing as much as they can to get to these people.
It should be a journalist that interviews him. Or even, they have a very old-fashioned machine, their comms department. Yeah, it's not quite...
It's quite embarrassing at this point. Like, if Farage... Farage just has like a meme guy.
It was sort of like during the election when they went straight to the Sun. That was like their first port of call.
For the Sun's fucking... Like, to
not even endorse them.
Their panel show.
Yeah.
What the fuck is like...
And it got like, 2,000 views, if that.
Like, and I'm actually not trying to slag off the Sun here, but if you're going to do the Sun, you do the print edition. Why are you putting time and effort into a fucking like broadcast bit that they're only doing because News UK have a spare studio because they shut down Talk TV?
Yeah,
that's like, why are you going there and not to a digital native first?
And you see, that's what Trump's son got about the landscape in America.
Oh, Barron.
Yeah. He was like, you need to get on the podcasts. Onto the podcast.
Where's Starmer's son? Starmer's son should be. you should be saying you should be on Have a Word. You should be on Angela Rayner. I've been saying this for fucking ages. she should do Saving Grace. Angela Rayner on Saving Grace.
Yeah, she'd be
would
great on there.
absolutely
She'd fly.
nail that.
But it's just like the entire comms strategy is so tired and more in line with kind of like the Blair and Brown years than it is like fit for the digital our digital times. Because even when they come out in the morning on a broadcast round and they've got a new policy to announce, or they've got like a new piece of like, something they're offering, and you go, this is so tired. No one, you don't need to do this. You don't need to invent like a new piece of something, a little new morsel every single day to talk about on the broadcast rounds. You need to have some personality
100%.
and you need to spend most of your time actually trying to enact the policy, then bring it.
Who are the cool Labour people? Because I think having like cool people actually does help.
Last week I was out with a Lord, but a Labour grandee, and we were talking about this exact thing.
Mandelson?
But we were trying to work out who is good online.
Right.
And I was saying, obviously Angela.
Yeah.
I think she's very good online. I do think Darren Jones is good online as well.
Yep.
But people, they always put forward, like, you should keep, like, your Pat McFaddens, put him on the broadcast round, right? Keir Starmer, put him on the... Keir Starmer comes across, like Sadiq Khan, if they're in a 1 hour interview where they're relaxed, they come across very well.
100%.
When they're having to do short, sharp questions, they fall flat.
No, they do. I actually think Clive Lewis is quite good.
Clive Lewis is good. He is good.
He's not really in the tent, though, I suppose. But if you got someone like...
He's not quite in the tent, but he's very good friends with Rayner. Do you know that?
Really?
Yeah, very good friends. But he's not quite in the tent. Who else in the cabinet? But you look at someone like Bridget Phillipson. So there's someone, she does these fire... What am I doing today with all my pronunciation? She does these fireside chats with teachers and education staff. Like, I think she does it once a month, but don't quote me on that. And she is not building up rapport with the education cohort of this country, because every time she comes back on, she's like, and we've announced this and we've announced that. And then the second that she gets faced with like a slightly difficult question, like, okay, this 2.8% pay rise that you've announced, the schools can't afford that. What budget is it coming out of? And she'll be like, we can't make any promises at the moment. But if you're doing a fireside chat,
you need to be more
with teachers, you need to be human.
Yeah,
personable.
Because also, that's your main demographic that you have to please.